Thank you very much, Patrick. And thank you for Eileen for inviting me to the conference. This is my first time here, and I was kind of shocked when I just heard that it's supposed to be the last time. I hope that's not going to be the case. All right. The theme of this conference is sustainability versus the American dream. But there really is no versus. The American dream is such an inspiring and beautiful dream that it became reality. A dream that allows people to live up to their potential and to pursue their happiness is so powerful that it can emerge as reality. And the dream was lived, it was sustained for several hundred years. I mean, what Georgie said, we should really take their terms and use them for our side and turn them against them. We are the ones who are sustainable. We are the ones who are for sustainable systems and not the other side. And even if the dream ends, as it does for us in today's realities of Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and affirmatively furthering fair housing, never forget that the American dream is so compelling that it reemerges in countries as far away as Estonia or Poland, and one day perhaps in the country where I was conceived, the United States of America. The founders did what they could to design a sustainable constitution that would withstand the onslaught of those longing for more control and more power. The founders also knew that any system, even the best, can be broken. One important example of our constitutional breakdown today is the rulemaking process. Congress delegates much of its legislative power to executive agencies. Two prime examples are Dodd-Frank and Obamacare. Such broad congressional mandates to executive agencies violate the separation of powers, and they violate also the concept of decentralized local control. Now, another example of unconstitutional rulemaking is a new rule that was developed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. This rule was written over several years, and it was published as a proposed rule in July of 2013. The rule has the Orwellian name AFFH, which stands for Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. What on earth does that mean? You are about to find out. Now, who of you in the audience has heard about AFFH? All right, couple. It's a ghastly rule. I'm telling you, it's no fun to talk about it, and for you it's not going to be fun to learn about it, but it's important to talk about it, and it's important to learn about it so that you know what's coming, and so that you have a chance to fight back. AFFH is not a new expression. It was first mentioned in the Fair Housing Act of 1968. What it came to mean in practice was that local governments that wanted grant money from HUD had to do a so-called analysis of impediments to fair housing. This is usually abbreviated by the bureaucrats as AI, the analysis of impediments. This analysis was basically a laundry list of obstacles to fair housing that had to be submitted to HUD. But this will fundamentally change with the new AFFH rule. This rule is 33 pages long, and it's 3 columns on each page, and it's very small font. The word plan or planning or planned is used several hundred times in these 33 pages. The rule has not been finalized yet, which is really unusual since it was published over a year ago. Publication is expected next month, October 2014, and it will then take effect immediately. Is it going to be published October 2014? I have no idea. We'll see. This new AFFH rule is the latest and probably the most brazen attempt by HUD to social engineer the American people. And there hasn't been a lack of attempts to do this by HUD in the past. HUD's social engineering projects always had deleterious consequences for Americans in general, and often particular disastrous results for low-income minorities. There is a reason why HUD is also known as the Department for Home Wrecking and Utopian Development. Just recall, for example, that HUD was the regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Without HUD imposing ever higher subprime mortgage quotas on the two GSEs, and all the way up to 57% in 2007, there would not have been a financial crisis. What will AFFH do? It's all about control over land use. It's about who controls how land is used by whom. And that's why it's also about property rights, since those who control land use indirectly control property. The purpose of AFFH is to put the federal government in control of land zoning. It's the attempt to control who lives where via seizing control over land zoning from local governments. Traditionally, land use questions have been decided locally by local governments, the thought being that those who live in the area should make the decisions that shape the character of the area in which they live. Makes sense, because they are the ones who are most affected by these decisions and who have to live with the results. So the representatives of the people in Town A decide how the land in Town A is being used, but they don't decide how the land in Town B is being used. So how much mixed zoning, how much multifamily zoning, how much one-family zoning, industrial zoning, etc. This principle is called home rule, at least in New York. All right. Why is it that an agency of the federal government is so intent on controlling the use of land? In short, because they don't like the results of local zoning. They don't like the way people naturally and voluntarily settle in racial and ethnic clusters. They see communities that have 30, 40 or more black people living in them. They see communities with 80 or 90% of white middle-class people, and they do not like it. HUD bureaucrats call such naturally occurring settlement patterns segregation or even racial segregation, although legal segregation was abolished over 40 years ago, and municipalities would be sued by their counties if they ever came up again with discriminatory practices in their zoning rules. So what does HUD want? What is the vision behind the new AFFH rule? The long-term vision is this: to create neighborhoods that have the correct racial and ethnic mix, and on top of that, the correct income mix. Correct? What does that mean? It means that people living in a town or village should ideally mirror the race ratios, ethnic ratios, and income ratios of the county, and sometimes it's in other administrative areas, for example, in rural areas, but I don't have time to go into this. There is just one problem. Such neighborhoods do not come naturally. They have to be socially engineered. And so HUD set out to do exactly that. They put it this way in the summary of the rule: to take steps proactively to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities for all. And they do a pretty good job. It doesn't sound too terrible if you don't know what they are talking about. How will AFFH work? Journalist Paul Sperry, he is the editorialist for the Investor's Business Daily, wrote, "Under the scheme, HUD plans to map every US neighborhood by race and publish so-called geospatial data pinpointing racial imbalances. Areas deemed overly segregated will be forced to change the zoning laws to allow construction of subsidized and other affordable housing to bring more low-income minorities into white suburbs. HUD's maps will be used to select affordable housing sites." To give you an idea what all this means and how it plays out, let's have a look at Westchester County, New York, where I live. Westchester County is one of HUD's test laboratories. HUD bureaucrats were working on the rule for several years before publication in 2013. And all this time, HUD was using Westchester, as the Wall Street Journal put it, to test drive its racial engineering project. What has been happening in Westchester County over the last 5 years will give you a taste of what's coming to local governments all over America. Ron Sims, the former Deputy Secretary of HUD, called Westchester in 2009 the grand experiment. You never want to be the grand experiment of your government. Doubtlessly, this is Westchester's role from HUD's point of view. From the viewpoint of most of those living in the test lab of Westchester, it's a battle against the intrusion and control of the federal government. And here is the story. Westchester County lies just to the north of New York City. It has a population of almost 1 million. It is famous for having the highest property taxes in the entire United States. Democrats outregister Republicans by 2-1. Nonetheless, in 2010, Westchester elected a conservative Republican, Rob Astorino, to become county executive. He was re-elected last November by a wide margin and is now running against Andrew Cuomo for governor of New York. He, by the way, has 2.4 million in his war chest, and Cuomo had 35. He still has 30 million. So if you want to do a good deed, give some money to Rob Astorino. He needs it. Among 62 counties in New York, Westchester is the fourth most racially and ethnically diverse county. 56% of the population is white, 24% Hispanic, and 16% black. People in Westchester live where they feel comfortable to live, within areas where they can afford to live. In 2005, a far left-wing nonprofit organization named ADC, the Anti-Discrimination Center of Metropolitan New York, sued Westchester County using a whistleblower provision in the False Claims Act. They sued Westchester County on behalf of the federal government. The organization accused Westchester of having received federal community development grant money without having affirmatively furthered fair housing. Back then, Westchester had a Democratic county governor whose administration correctly regarded the lawsuit as having no merit. They called the lawsuit garbage, which it was. But that was not the view of District Judge Denise Cote, who was in charge of the case. Westchester ended up having no choice but to come to a settlement with the federal government. Under this settlement, Westchester agreed to build by 2016 750 affordable housing units in 31 mostly white communities. 650 of these units have to be in municipalities with a population of fewer than 3% African Americans and fewer than 7% Hispanics. The units have to be what's called in HUD jargon affirmatively marketed in certain areas within and without Westchester County to make sure to attract the desired races and ethnicities. But what exactly was Westchester being punished for? One HUD official put it this way: the county's analysis of impediments did not examine race-based impediments or segregation, even though that was what the report, she meant the analysis, was supposed to be about. Westchester had, of course, always done its analysis of impediments, and it had always been accepted. Westchester was even praised by HUD officials multiple times for its exemplary affordable housing practices. What was on Westchester's list of affordable housing obstacles? Things like very high property taxes, very high property values, very little open land to build on, open space requirements in watershed areas, and similar things. What was not on the list? Racial segregation and racially discriminatory zoning practices. This is also called exclusionary zoning. And why did Westchester not list these as bullet points in its analysis? Because there is no exclusionary zoning and there is no racial segregation in the county. Of course there isn't. It's illegal. Any town that had such provisions or that would racially segregate would be sued by the county. Anyone, no matter of which race, of which ethnicity, can buy land, can buy a house anywhere. Of course, not everybody can afford to buy property, and especially not in the more expensive towns. In fact, many people of all races have left Westchester for the more affordable counties to the north and the west. Essentially, Westchester County was punished by HUD for not telling a lie, namely for not claiming that there is racial segregation and that there are race-based obstacles to owning property. But for HUD, this truth is a lie. For HUD, racial segregation lurks everywhere because it redefined the meaning of the term. Any municipality that has a significantly lower or higher percentage of races and ethnicities than the county overall is regarded as racially segregated. This is called disparate impact. I'm sure you all have heard about this term, disparate impact. It's skilled by demographic results. And HUD also has its own definition of exclusionary zoning. For HUD, it does not mean that a town has practices in place that exclude certain people from owning property. What is exclusionary zoning for HUD officials? For example, limits on the height of buildings, maximum lot sizes, and minimum lot sizes. Even if a quarter-acre lot has been condemned by HUD as exclusionary. Minimum distance requirements between houses, a high percentage of one-family zoning in an area, or low percentages of mixed zoning or multifamily zoning. What HUD does, 5 minutes? Oh my goodness, okay. All right, I'm going to speak more quickly. What HUD does not say is why communities should have very similar percentages of races and ethnicities as the larger administrative area to which they belong. For them, it goes without saying, as if it were self-evident. But is it? I, for example, live in West Harrison. About 80% of the population in this area is of Italian ancestry. Many still speak Italian. It's a close-knit community. People know each other. They have their friends. They have their relatives nearby. There's a little Italian deli up the road. What's wrong with that? Why is that a problem? But we are considered racially segregated. That's the way people like to live. We tend to look for people that are similar to us. Most important seems to be cultural similarity, which naturally often also means ethnic or racial similarity, but not always. For example, affluent upper-middle-class whites living in upscale communities who are perfectly happy to live next to affluent upper-middle-class blacks would be appalled to see a family move in next door that they consider hillbillies. So what is wrong with people voluntarily settling in areas where they feel they fit in and belong? There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, not in a free and democratic society. And imagine Westchester's African Americans, if they were distributed across the county in such a way that every community had more or less the county-wide ratio. Well, HUD officials might be shocked to know that blacks actually enjoy living among other blacks in Westchester and don't exactly dream about being sprinkled across the 56% white people like chocolate sprinkles on frozen yogurt. West Harrison's Italians like to live together, so do Yonkers African Americans. They don't necessarily long to be transplanted into an exclusive 90% white upper-class community like Scarsdale, where they would not fit in and where they have a good chance of ending up lonely, resentful, and alienated. 2 weeks ago, I went to see a construction site in Larchmont where 51 of the 750 affordable housing units are being built. Larchmont is an upper-middle-class community, very expensive, and it's mostly white. This building is very close to the station, very close to the center of town. The shell is already up. It's big, 4 stories high. It's a high-density building with 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments. Here's what it's like. It's a small plot of land. Immediately to the south is an ugly open area that belongs to the Department of Sanitation. Immediately to the east, and really immediately to the east, is the I-95. Right next to the I-95 are the railroad tracks. Immediately to the west are exit and access ramps to the I-95. It's noisy, it's ugly, it's desolate. Although it's close to the station, it's one of the few areas in Larchmont where Larchmonters never go. The location is awful, and, well, I have to hurry up. So nobody in his right mind would have built an apartment building in this location. But the developers say, quote, that they feel great about this location. Why? Because HUD says the affordable housing units have to be in walking distance of public transportation and shops. And there is so little open space left in Larchmont, and the space that is left open is really not fit to be built on. You know, the people who should really move into this building are those HUD officials who wrote the rule and their politician friends. So, right. What blacks and Yonkers and Mount Vernon don't like about their towns is the bad schools and the crime. So what would make sense is to let Eva Moskowitz open Success Academy charter schools in Yonkers and Mount Vernon. She has done this all over New York City with great success. 95% of her students are black and Hispanic kids from poor families, and they outperform most of the students in New York State. So County Executive Rob Astorino was elected shortly after the settlement was reached. The 750 units are being built. The county is even ahead of schedule. But the settlement also requires the submission of a satisfactory analysis of impediments. The county has produced not 1, but 8 analyses of impediments in the last 4 years. It spent countless hours analyzing all of its 853 local zoning districts, but found nothing indicating the use of exclusionary practices based on race. Why so many analyses? Why? Because HUD keeps rejecting them one after the other. They are not satisfactory. And you already know why, because Westchester doesn't list racial segregation. Can I have 1 extra minute? Go ahead. Thank you. County Executive, thank you very much. County Executive Astorino told journalist Terry Eastland, until we reach the conclusions they give us, which have no relationship to actual facts, they will continue to deny our analysis. It's not about 750 units. That's the starting point, not the ending point. It's about changing the world. About 2 years ago, HUD began going beyond the settlement, asking for more units to be built. Now the 750 units are described as a start to be followed by many more additional units, and one of the numbers that is consistently floated is 5,000. In September 2013, a year ago, HUD dropped all pretense and simply confronted Westchester with a request to accept HUD's view that there is exclusionary zoning in the county. And it threatened to cut off federal housing grants promised to towns in Westchester if the county did not concur. But Rob Astorino knows that giving in to HUD's demands means that he has to sue those towns that allegedly have exclusionary zoning practices. How can he do that? How can he sue towns for something he knows they aren't guilty of? It would be an immoral thing for him to do, and he is not going to do it. And so HUD began withholding funds. So far, it withheld community block grants totaling about $20 million. These funds, by the way, would have gone exclusively to low-income minority neighborhoods for important maintenance projects like fixing sidewalks and fixing lights. By the way, Westchester County's Board of Legislators has a Democratic majority that is eager to accommodate HUD and is looking to find a way to a separate agreement with HUD. Luckily, at the moment, the county board does not have the required supermajority to move ahead without Astorino's consent. So I'm running out of time, but I want you to hear this one quote from one of Westchester's Democratic legislators. She said, we have to look at creative ways of changing zoning to bring in possibly more people, more diverse groups of people, diverse kinds of housing, housing that goes vertically, where you can actually have more bodies, potentially paying more property taxes. So I have looked at this as a huge opportunity that the federal government has given us. We should not be looking at this as a punishment. How? Okay. Just a few more words about how we can fight back. How can local governments fight back? This spring, Astorino proposed that Westchester should establish its own community development grant program to free itself from HUD. What he is saying to HUD amounts to, you keep your funds, it's really our money, but keep it, and we'll keep local zoning. Another promising way to fight back is for Congress to make use of its power of the purse. And indeed, this June, the House voted in favor of an amendment to defund the implementation of AFFH. But there's presently no chance that the Senate will do the same. And so the battle continues. But when the new affirmatively furthering fair housing rule takes effect, thousands of American communities will find themselves on the same battlefield. Thank you.